I'm Duncan McLeod, and this is Tech Central. I'm joined now by Norman Moyo, the CEO of a company called Distributed Power Africa, or DPA. They're a specialist in solar energy and particularly in large-scale projects like powering data centers. Norman, welcome to the show. Tell me a bit about DPA. I believe it's part of the Econet stable. Am I right there?
Yes, you are right, Duncan. So DPA stands for Distributed Power Africa. We are a Pan-African renewable energy or renewable technology business, focusing primarily on distributed energy across the what we call CNI, corporate and industries in the continent. And our preference is obviously systems between 5 kilowatt to 5 megawatt. And these are primarily systems meant to drive, whether it's the telecom sector, whether it's a tower, which is a typical 5 kilowatt system, or it's a data center, which can be as big or as big and as large as a 5 megawatt system. Yes. And so that's what we focus on. And we also focus on what we consider investment grade corporates, telecoms, data centers, your Unilevers, your Nestles, primary schools, secondary schools, clinics, really everything in between a 5 kilowatt and 5 megawatt. And we finance these systems. We sign a power lease agreement for 15 years. So we become the alternative energy provider for the corporates, and obviously in the process improving energy security, and in the process including energy and making energy a lot more affordable, and obviously just helping with the carbon effect.
Yeah. How long has Distributed Power Africa been around, and what are some of the projects you've been involved in so far?
So we've been around for nearly 3 years, and this journey started primarily in Zimbabwe. We moved on to South Africa. We are now into Kenya, Ivory Coast, moving into Nigeria. So again, following a certain footprint across the continent, whether it's your typical CNI that we are following, multinational businesses that are really sensitive about their energy security and energy cost.
Yes.
Today, as we know, we can deliver energy as low as 10 cents per kilowatt hour compared to you running a generator at 40 cents per kilowatt hour. So there is no rocket science there. You can't be running a generator and be profitable at the same time. You need to move to a much more alternative sources of energy. So some of our high profile deployments has been around switching centers, telecom switching centers. And we have now started doing farms. So a massive solar farm is able to power most of its needs as a farm. Whether they are T estates in the continent and whether they are data centers in the continent.
Now, let's talk about data centers. You've built solar plants, solar farms for Africa data centers, both here in South Africa and I think in East Africa as well. I imagine that data centers are huge consumers of power. Are you able to take them off grid entirely, or is it sort of an adjunct to the grid power that they get supplied?
So it's a journey. It's a journey with the data centers. A lot of data centers are very sensitive about, firstly, energy security, but they are also very sensitive about the decarbonization effect.
Yes.
Given a choice, the data centers would like, because of the quality of their clientele, which are mostly your tier one, first world cloud computing companies, they're very particular about energy, the quality of energy that they generate. So we focus primarily, first and foremost, on delivering them the decarbonization effect. Then secondarily, because they are very sensitive energy users, they require a lot of power redundancy. So you cannot per se take all of the data center away from, say, the utility or the storage conversation. They will always require several layers of power for their own redundancy. But today, we are now capable of delivering easily a 50 megawatt power to data centers. You can literally build a farm away and put that power into the grid and deliver 50 megawatts. So for most of the data centers, essentially, you can actually take them off grid by ensuring that from a carbon effect, by ensuring that you put in enough load into the utility and you drop it at the data center. So they can tick the decarbonization box.
Right. So they're still using they're still using grid power, but they're pushing back into the grid from their solar farms, so they are in effect carbon neutral. How big is Sorry, Norman, carry on.
Yeah, no, so it's a hybrid model. And because these data centers require, especially the tier one, require complete 99.999% uptime.
Yes.
So you have to work with a hybrid model, which really has got some lithium batteries, certainly PV, in some cases utility. And obviously they'll probably have a backup sometime, even a generator backup.
Yes, yes. How big, out of interest, would a 50 megawatt solar farm be? What sort of acreage are we looking at?
It's a typical 50-hectare farm. So we try to do
50 hectares, wow.
Yes, yes. And listen, the fascinating part of solar farming is that there are farms out. If you look at South Africa, we've got a lot of land. Some of the land is good for barley and wheat and maize, but some of the land is very rocky. You can't use it for much. Wow, why can't you use that to farm solar? And if you look at what we've just done, we've just launched a 1.8 megawatt farm in Zimbabwe in a tea estate. And so you could, now it's at the confluence, we're at the confluence of agriculture and energy, where energy can now become a core part of what we farm out there in the continent. And obviously Africa is very unique because we've got beautiful radiation here and we've got the real estate. So we are actually able to start generating a lot of energy for our own consumption. We believe the world is moving more towards distributed energy, not so much more towards utility. Utility will always be there, but it will probably serve a certain specific purpose. But in this day and age, every business, through its car park or through its rooftop or through its additional piece of land next door, should be able to start generating its own power. And so should data centers.
Right, right. Now, what's involved in a large solar project, and what are some of the things people should be considering before they adventure on a journey like this? What do they need to know up front? They've read about solar, they're interested in potentially doing it for their business, but what should they know before they pull the trigger?
So number one, that the technology has become extremely advanced and extremely reliable. Whether it's this solar PV technology itself, which typically you want to work with tier one providers, which gives you that security and that, I think, quality assurance that this PV is going to be operational and delivering for the next 25 years. We actually guarantee some of our technologies for that long. Today, you are also able to actually generate energy and use very highly skilled and high technology lithium batteries to actually be able to generate power even during the day, even away from what we call a typical grid-tied system. Because most of your solar today is grid-tied, but you can now put some lithium batteries and be able to go off-grid. So in some markets, we have deployed Tesla power walls.
Yes.
And even for telecom towers, and we are now able to deploy Tesla power packs for typical data centers. So you can also deploy tier one technologies, and you certainly need tier one partners. People who are not going to slap your panels and leave your building, and then you start having leakage problems and operations maintenance issues. So you do need to find partners that are very reliable and that are willing to put their balance sheet behind your deployment.
All right. So you said that
I think the second issue is financing. I think we try to encourage businesses to say, you know, maybe if you are Nestle, you are a typical, you do milk and all other milk-related products. You are not a power company. So most businesses in Africa, by accident of history, end up becoming power companies.
Yes.
You look at your balance sheet and look at how many staff are working in power, how many staff are managing generators and all that. That's not your core business. We say, business, stick to your core business. Energy is not your core business. Find a partner to deliver the energy for you. If it's not your utility player, find another distributed energy partner to focus on the energy. Because focusing on energy means also focusing on the technology, the operations and maintenance, and all the nuances that goes with delivering energy. But we are also trying to encourage business to say, gone are the days when a typical milk company end up becoming an energy company by accident. A typical telecom or a tower co end up becoming a power co. It should remain a tower co. Power co is a different business, different dynamics. Tower co is a different business, different dynamics. When you blend them together, you will not understand why your business is not making money, because you are stretching your organization into two different businesses that have got two different dynamics.
Mm. Mm.
Yes.
Okay. So the technology is advancing at an incredible rate, as you mentioned. And I've read reports suggesting the pricing of solar PV has come down dramatically in the recent past. What is happening with pricing on these sort of projects, and how? I mean, what are we looking at? Are we looking at Moore's law type power and pricing shifts as time goes on? And what impact are these price reductions having on the market overall?
So, I like to talk general rule of thumb. The prices of PV has gone down by nearly 75% from what it was 5 years ago.
Wow.
Every 3 months, that pricing of PV continues to drop, albeit marginally. But it has dropped by nearly 75%. One of the biggest challenges I have when I talk to corporate Africa today is that they still are stuck in that period 5 years ago, when solar was almost beyond reach. So I try to simplify to them by saying your typical utility grid only cost is as high as between 11 cents to 15 cents per kilowatt hour. That's what you pay when you get power from the grid. I can deliver energy at as low as 7 cents, between 7 cents and 10 cents with solar. So gone are the days when solar was this very expensive source of energy. It's probably the cheapest source of energy today, especially if you start playing above 1 megawatt.
Right.
So that's part of the narrative that has changed in the pricing. Now, so the prices continue to go down significantly, but also what has also continued is the quality of the panels, and the generation capacity of the panels have improved significantly if we're focusing on solar at the moment. So that, so it's more slow basically. It continues to improve, and I think production continues. Now, if you look at the rest of the world, the deployment itself in places like the UK, where they are now doing 100 gigawatts worth of power plants, the cost has significantly gone down, that there is no other source of energy which is as affordable as PV, for instance. So now you also have got a few things that are beginning to track closely, which is the story of lithium storage. So the biggest weakness today with the PV is you need storage.
Yes.
Or you need grid, because PV requires what we call a reference. So solar on its own requires a reference, and the reference can come from a battery, or it can come from the grid itself. But even a grid-tied system today is a very strong value proposition to any corporate in Africa. Storage is still, as a pricing, is still quite high, and it will probably continue to stay that high for a while, mostly because of the demand for electric vehicles, which also requires the same lithium technology used, which we need to store energy.
Yes.
But that as it may, there is a lot of innovation going into that space, and we are working with a number of innovative players out of the Silicon Valley. One of them is called Solar Electric, where we are now working to deploy solutions today into Africa, particularly related to COVID. So we've got solutions that we've now developed, which are meant to power at least up to 1,000 health facilities in the continent with a typical 20 kilowatt hybrid solution, where we've got we've got a lithium battery combined with solar, and it's a plug and play. We can show up at the clinic, and within a day, the clinic will have full power and full capabilities. So, but the pricing is improving almost on a quarterly basis.
Are there alternatives to lithium ion that are suitable for these sort of applications? I mean, battery technology always seems to be so far behind everything else in the technology industry. We see it in our cell phones, for example, that the power has improved massively over the last 10 years, yet they still only last for a day or so. Are there alternatives on the horizon to lithium ion that are promising to bring a real revolution to the solar PV industry?
There are alternatives, and there are a lot of gas. There's a lot of alternatives in the gas space, but obviously there's wind itself, although very expensive and very difficult to reach. One of the stories I always give when I get that question is, if I'm a DHL and I've got a big warehouse, the first thing I'll do immediately without asking questions, or if I've got a mine, is to slap enough panels on top of my roof. Because in the next year, 2 to 5 years, as the alternatives are emerging, immediately I can start to enjoy some savings. Immediately. I can also start to bring in some carbon effect to my energy mix. 3-4 years down the line, I will be able to go back to that same power plant and I can start upgrading it. And by upgrading, I'm either bringing in lithium batteries or I'm bringing in some, so there's a number of new technologies. Not many have really come to scale, to be honest, at the moment. So it remains a very explorative space. You will have to go to gas, you will have probably to put some wind, and there's some biothermal technologies that are emerging, but none of them have been able to scale yet. So we still remain with, in some cases, lead acid batteries, which for us is not a technology of choice, but lithium batteries are beginning to grow. We've got a player called Blue Nova that we work with here in South Africa, and they've started developing some very decent technologies. So I think it's emerging. It will catch up a lot more quicker than we think because of the demand for lithium batteries coming out of the EV technology emerging. And so we actually think it will catch up in the next 2 years to 3 years. We should start to be able to see technologies beginning to catch up. But listen, we still have got grid. So let's ride on the grid and be able to start using that to generate more while we're plugging in the storage solutions.
What are the pricing trends we're seeing in lithium ion storage? Are the batteries coming down at the same sort of price rate as solar PV, or is it a more gentle decline, if it's even coming down at all?
Good. I won't be able to answer you definitively on that one.
Okay.
It might not even be coming down at all. The reality we are seeing is it has, at best, it has stayed the same.
Right.
The production has increased, the availability of lithium batteries has grown, but the price per kilowatt or per watt has not gone down significantly, simply because of the dual demand that's emerging for lithium batteries. So they've not gone down significantly, not at all.
Understood.
Although we are seeing an increase in both production and an increase in the investment going into the lithium battery technologies.
I imagine in Africa that many of the people looking to install solar solutions are doing so because the grid is unreliable and possibly not available at all. Does that mean the projects that you work on through your company are perhaps quite different to what similar companies would be doing in North America, Europe, and Asia, for example, where the grid is perhaps a little more stable? Are you working more on entirely off-grid options for your clients, or is it always a case of hybrid solutions involving the grid?
Yeah, so I think our story in Africa is significantly different from the Western world.
Right.
In the Western world, and when we started this journey as DPA with Solar City, just before they merged with Tesla in Silicon Valley. So we got a lot of learnings and lessons, and we leveraged a lot on their business model. But what they need power for in the Western world is significantly different from what we need power for in Africa. They need power for carbon effect. They look at power, and the business case for power is made through many aspects, including they look at tax rebates and things like that. I'm not looking for power. When I approach a Unilever in Africa, I'm not looking to talk to them about only carbon effect. I'm looking because the lights are out sometimes. As you know, South Africa has been suffering from almost 4-hour outages for the past 6 months.
Yes.
Nothing says we're out of the woods. As you know, Zimbabwe is possibly sitting at significantly 15 or so hours of blackouts. Zambia is following suit. They say misery loves company. So a number of countries in Africa are joining up to those blackouts. When I've got a blackout, it's not only the carbon conversation, it's a sustainability issue. It's a business viability issue. The machines start shutting down. Productivity dies. So as a result of that, our need for Africa is significantly different to the need for the rest of the world. So you'll notice that our technologies here are more for energy security and also even just affordability of energy, but also for just business continuity. So when we approach your data centers, your switching centers in Africa, it's a two-pronged conversation. So while we start with a grid tied, we are building these systems to go off grid. Listen, I always say the story of energy is probably the same story of telecoms in Africa.
Yes.
When we started, we had two poles, and they were holding two fixed lines to the two poles in Africa. That's how we used to communicate. You go into the rest of Africa today, those two poles are still there, but they are very old legacy equipment. Mobile phones have emerged, GSM has emerged, and we've taken over the entire telecoms infrastructure using the new technologies. So distributed energy is the new technology that is going to be able to revolutionize energy the way GSM revolutionized telecoms.
Yeah.
That's the kind of relationship we're looking at.
Yeah.
And so we are building these systems to become complete hybrid. In some cases, the way it will work is from 9 o'clock in the morning, my solar takes over the load until 4 p.m. From 4 p.m., I should be able to allow, in some cases, for now, I'll rely with the grid taking over until the next morning. In future, I would like the storage to take over, the lithium batteries to take over until the next morning. Next morning, solar picks up and carries the load. And in between there, if I've got an unexpected occurrence, then maybe a generator will kick in, only then. But generator should be like my land of last resort.
Yes.
I should not be firing it up at all. It should be gaining dust sitting there because it's a very expensive source of energy, both just because it's expensive, but also there's a lot of pilferage that comes with generators. So in my past life, I worked with a company called Helios Towers, where we were running a lot of towers in the continent. And you could imagine the amount of pilferage we suffered, the amount of losses we suffered, and breakdown in equipment due to over-reliance on generators. So the strategy there was also to shut down the generator and deploy solar and deploy lithium batteries across. Now, we have got a challenge in Africa because there's a lot of also activities that goes on around these batteries, but the technology is advancing enough that even theft becomes a problem now.
Yes, yes, interesting. That the pilferage you spoke about around generators, was that mainly of diesel?
It's mostly diesel, but also lithium batteries. So batteries are also subject to that. But the technology has become so advanced that we are now able to track that battery. As soon as you tamper with it, we will be flying to pick it up from your house. And so, and in most cases, they don't even work. The moment they are removed from their applications, they are basically become defunct. They don't work anymore. So the technology is advancing. We now have got the sensor technology that basically monitors each and every asset that we deploy to make sure that these assets are also well protected and they cannot be moved around anymore. And so we also work with local authorities to ring fence the security of these energy assets.
Yeah. Have you had any interest, as a matter of interest, from utilities, companies like Eskom, for example, in South Africa, and other utilities around Africa, to provide solar solutions to actually generate electricity for the grid?
Let me put a lot of it, an exponential demand has come from the utility players. South Africa obviously has been at the forefront through these IPP projects where you feed into the grid. Now, as DPA, Distributed Power Africa, we are also known as Econet Energy. We have not been very active in the utility space, what you call the IPP space, for the simple reason that we believe the future actually lies in distributed solutions. Every building in Africa should be able to generate its own energy. Your house, Duncan, I should be able to put a 10 kilowatt on top of your house, and I will improve the value of your house by 20% compared to your neighbor's house when it becomes self-generating. So we think there's a much bigger opportunity in that space. The other challenge we always have with utility players is because a lot of them are not on a very strong footing at the moment. So to be able to attract investors, DFIs, climate funds, to come into a space which is very convoluted and complicated, can be a very difficult sell. But whereas I can put in $1 million at a Unilever manufacturing plant or at an Anglo-American mine, it's a lot more difficult to deploy 100 million and ask, say, the Zimbabwean, the ZESA or ZESCO or Eskom as the off-taker. It's a hard sell.
Yes.
But with $100 million, I can deploy $100 million very quickly across in Anglo-American mines, very, very quickly, and I won't struggle with that. So that's one of the problems. But secondly, we actually believe the future of utility is probably as distribution companies. They've got a beautiful infrastructure that can be used as storage. See, I can build a 10 megawatt at your plot, and I can feed it into the grid and use the grid as a storage facility. And so nothing stops a utility player to see themselves as a potential different business. I was told when Domino Pizza started, they were making pizza and selling pizza. But in the process, they introduced the motorbike to deliver the pizza to Duncan's house. Then when they did the unit economics, they found out they were making more money from the motorbike than from the pizza. So they started becoming a delivery company. Nothing stops an ESCOM from building its capacity, leveraging on its strength, which is the massive distribution network and the massive TNT transmission network that it has built, and it can become a massive storage player where players can just feed power into the grid and off-takers can take it from the other side. Now, so we have got a lot of interest across the continent with the utility players asking us to come in, but there are other players that have got capacity to play into the utility. We love the distribution. That's our sweet spot, 5 kilowatts to 5 megawatt. Tier 1 investment companies that are going to be in existence for the next 15 years. We finance it, we do the operations and maintenance, and we say to the companies, let us be your energy partner. We integrate the grid itself, and we integrate the generator, and in future, we'll bring the storage to that same distributed energy off-taker.
Are regulations and policies in some of the markets in which you operate a challenge? I seem to recall that it's not permitted in South Africa to sell any excess power you produce back into the grid. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. And are rules like that elsewhere on the continent?
So there are a few governments and regulatory authorities that have become very progressive. So I'll give you one classic case. So first and foremost, let me just say, as a general statement, the regulatory environment around clean energy is very advanced in Africa.
Okay.
Although it's developing, but the attitude is very progressive.
That's good to hear.
So I want a meeting with any minister in Africa. It will take me 2 hours or so to have a conversation. I'll have the conversation. With any regulator, I'll have a conversation. And I can tell you, it's not going to be a fight. Okay. The utility players don't see us as competition. They see us as a complementary and we as an enabler that helps them to deliver what they need to deliver out there. The quality of power and the amount of power they generate is needed for certain base loads. What we generate is needed for certain applications. So there's complementarity in the two businesses. That's the first issue. Secondly, you'll find in most of the countries across the continent, most of the PV and the storage are even coming in without any, have been exempted from duties and things like that. That for us is very progressive. It makes energy very affordable. And thirdly, most of them have given us a certain threshold up to 1 megawatt. You don't need licensing. You can go and build a 1 megawatt for self-consumption very easily. Fourthly, there are some players now that are beginning to become more progressive. Even in Zimbabwe, up to 100 kilowatts, you can feed straight into the grid and do net metering. So I can generate all I need, and what I'm not using, I can feed it into the grid, and the meter can reverse at night.
Nice.
I got a call from the minister recently asking that they want to move that to a megawatt. Nice. That's the kind of conversations the minister called us, not us calling them. So that's the level of progressiveness that we are seeing. I think there's a realization that a key enabler to transform this continent is energy. And so there is not a lot of grandstanding when it comes to energy. The continent needs to fix the energy solution, and it's anyone that is able to find a solution to energy will find a solution to economic turnaround for their nation. And I think most of your governments, your presidents, and your regulators are very tuned in to that reality.
So would you say that South Africa is one of the least progressive markets on the continent?
At the risk of getting into trouble, no, I wouldn't say that. But I would say of all the countries, South Africa had one of the most robust energy infrastructure in the continent. Now, for you to be able to open up that significantly, it requires a lot of studies and a lot of investment. Do I put them behind? No. They have got a megawatt here. Kenya is now sitting at 3 megawatt. I can build a 3 megawatt in Kenya without many licensing applications. South Africa is sitting at a megawatt. They're now trying to jump to 10 megawatts. They're moving very progressively. However, there was a lot of investment in this country from an energy point of view. So I think it's a cruise ship versus a speedboat. If you are moving a cruise ship, you don't turn too quickly, otherwise you go under. Most of the countries in Africa are typical speedboats when it comes to energy infrastructure. They are small, very small, that they can afford to wiggle around very quickly. South Africa is a cruise ship when it comes to energy. So when you are turning a cruise ship, you have to do it in a measured way, lest you will run into problems. And I think it is just the nature of the beast that they have to navigate and turn in the way that they are turning. Are they progressive? They're moving. Is it fast enough? No. Especially consider this country cannot afford a 4-hour, let alone an 8-hour blackout.
Yes.
You will destroy the entire continent if South Africa continues on that path. So I think they are also beginning to come to terms with that. That's why recently they've been opening up to allow more IPPs to generate, more municipalities to generate power, and allowing most of these players to also be able to buy power. But a lot needs to be done. And these are unusual times. Yes. So you can't do business as usual in unusual times, even from an energy perspective. Before COVID, South Africa had already another problem, and energy was another major crisis in the country. So the same response that we saw in COVID needs to be the same response we see in energy. Energy has got a very debilitating effect to this economy if it's not addressed.
Yeah. We all know that the unreliable supply of electricity across the continent has been a big problem for decades. Given the investment that's going on, given the new technologies that are coming to the market, given the fact that solar PV as a technology, we haven't spoken about the other renewable energy types out there, but given that solar PV prices have tumbled 75% in the last 5 years, given the renewed interest in the private sector in investing in solutions, including the work that Distributed Power Africa is doing. What is your forecast for what the energy system is going to look like on the continent, say in a decade from now? Are we going to have a much more reliable electrical grid in Africa down the line?
Yes, I think one of the points you mentioned, which is fascinating there, is how do we transform the energy sector in Africa? I'm sorry to say, like we did in the telecoms, we didn't ask government to set up another telecom. We asked the private sector to come into the play. We did not actually, everyone always says, oh no, if Eskom disappears, jobs will be lost. I'm sorry. There are no jobs that were lost in telecom. If anything, everyone there was consumed by MTN, by Vodacom, by Cell Cs of this world.
Yeah.
Did the industry suffer? No, the industry grew exponentially with the introduction of energy with the introduction of GSM into the cellular, into the telecom space. It's exactly the same play we need to see in energy. We can continue to do a lot of, I call it pontification, where we can do all sorts of debates. We know what has worked before. Bring in the private sector, capacitate the private sector, enable them to deliver solutions. The private sector, by its nature, will find an equilibrium where the cost of energy will come down, power will be more reliable, and it will be much more cleaner than what it is today. We see the same playbook in the airline space.
Yes.
Allow the private sector to come in and do the work and do it well. And I think the energy story, for it to change, there is no amount of investment that needs to go into Eskom today, which will transform the energy space. What needs to happen is an enabling environment that starts to attract capital, quality capital, climate funds capital into the energy space. That starts to encourage businesses to open up their roofs and their massive carports that are busy gaining dust right now, and then they start generating energy. Most of your data centers have got massive rooftops. If you fly across what we call Midrand, where our data center is, just fly, take a flight. You can populate that entire data rooftops there, and you can generate enough power, not only to power the generator, to power the data center, but to also power almost every business in that locality today, using the solar that we are generating. Let's reimagine how we generate energy in Africa. The utility players and the government needs also to reimagine how we can solve the energy crisis. Insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. We can't do the same thing we did in telecoms and trying to fix the fixed line business. Let's allow private capital. Let's allow private players who are a lot more competitive, and the market itself will drive them to where they're supposed to. The government should provide an enabling environment for that.
So in many respects, the biggest challenge may be the politicians getting over perhaps their ideological stances on some of these issues and protecting some of the big state-owned enterprises.
Absolutely. I think it's not only about, I've always said to people, if you go to Africa today, I can tell you without any statistics close to my fingertips, some of the biggest contributors to tax in Africa today. You can imagine I come from the telecom space, 20 years there. Some of the biggest contributors to tax in Africa today are the GSM operators. All the GSM operators in the continent are probably among the top 10 in terms of contribution to revenues. Guess what? When my own chairman, Strive Masiwa, started the GSM business in Zimbabwe, I'm sure they charged him with treason. But you go back into that country, ask who is some of the biggest contributor to the tax revenue is the GSM operator. Come to South Africa, MTN, Vodacom, when you add them up, they're a big player. Go to Nigeria, MTN, Glo, Airtel, some of the biggest contributors to the tax coffers. So why protect an industry? Because they could have protected their fixed line business. They wouldn't be making the type of revenues today that they're making. This is the same story in this private, what do you call the SOE story?
Yes.
I think we have seen the playbook play over and over again. We know for a fact that when these distributed energy businesses and these private players come in here, the government will even benefit more.
More tax receipts.
The country will benefit more. The energy will become stable. And when energy is more affordable, cost of living will improve.
Yeah.
There is 650 million rural people in Africa today who do not have access to energy. I'm sorry, the role of the government is to look also after the 650 million people out there. And that's where certain attention and focus should be going towards. And not to compete with me about powering a data center when I can also deliver it. And let the customer beat me up, make sure that I can give him a fair price.
Yes. Yeah. I love your enthusiasm, Norman. I love your enthusiasm. But
we need that enthusiasm, or else we will not be able to take this continent from where we are if we continue with the kind of mindset that we have. And we've got a very unique technology that is now enabling, which favors Africa more than anything else, because we've got the sun, unlimited. We had the microwave, the waves that they use for telecoms. We now have got the sun, it's unlimited. We also have got a lot of real estate here. You know, we are different from the Swedens of this world and most of the Nordic countries where the land might be a problem. We do have a lot of land here, and some of it is not being used for agriculture.
Yes,
why don't you start funding something slightly different?
Yeah, I'm thinking in the Northern Cape, which is basically one big desert where it never rains and the sun always shines.
There you go.
Great stuff. Well, I love this conversation with you, Norman. Norman Moyo is CEO of Distributed Power Africa. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to Tech Central today and for sharing your insights.
Thank you, Duncan, and thank you for your time.